Imagine a weapon so colossal it had to ride the rails, a true titan of steel and steam that could hurl a projectile weighing more than a small car over the horizon. This is the story of the railway gun, a breathtaking symbol of industrial might and military ambition that dominated the battlefields of the early 20th century. These weren't just cannons. They were land-based battleships, monstrous pieces of artillery that represented the peak of heavy engineering. From the moment of their conception, they were designed to be overwhelming, to project power in a way no other weapon on land could. Their sheer size was a statement, a declaration of a nation's technological prowess and its will to dominate. Creating such a giant was an engineering marvel. Think about the challenges. You have a barrel, sometimes over 100 feet long, that needs to be supported so it doesn't droop under its own immense weight. The gun itself could weigh hundreds, even thousands of tons. This required a specially designed multi-axle railway carriage, often split into several sections, just to bear the load. Then there's the recoil. Firing a shell of that size generates a force that could rip a normal train car from its tracks. Engineers developed incredibly complex recoil systems, using hydraulic and pneumatic dampers to absorb the monumental kickback. Some designs even had the entire gun carriage roll backward along a curved section of track, using gravity and friction to dissipate the energy. Every single component, from the breech mechanism that had to withstand incredible pressures to the delicate aiming systems, was a testament to human ingenuity pushed to its absolute limit. Of course, having a giant gun is one thing, but moving it is another. Transporting a railway gun was a massive logistical operation. It wasn't just a matter of hooking it up to a locomotive and hitting the tracks. These behemoths required dedicated trains, sometimes multiple locomotives, just to pull them. A whole procession would follow, carrying the ammunition, the massive crew, maintenance equipment, and even cranes for assembly. The railway lines themselves had to be prepared. Tracks were reinforced, bridges were strengthened, and special spurs and sidings were built near the front lines. The gun couldn't just fire from any old spot. The ground had to be perfectly level and stable, often requiring the construction of concrete firing platforms or complex outrigger systems to stabilize the gun carriage. The entire process was a slow, deliberate, and incredibly vulnerable ballet of heavy machinery. It was a logistical beast that had to be fed constantly. When the time came to fire, it was a ritual of pure power. The crew, often numbering in the dozens or even hundreds, worked in a highly choreographed sequence. It was a symphony of human strength and mechanical precision. Huge shells, some taller than a person, were winched into place. Bags of propellant, weighing hundreds of pounds, were loaded into the breech. The massive breech block was swung shut and locked. Then, with the target coordinates dialed in and the area cleared, the command to fire was given. The resulting explosion was earth-shattering. A deafening roar would echo for miles, and the ground would shake as if from an earthquake. The shell would scream into the sky, arcing towards its distant target. The firepower was simply devastating. These guns were designed to smash through the thickest concrete fortifications, to obliterate railway junctions, and to terrorize entire cities from miles away. A single hit could vaporize a building or leave a crater the size of a house. They were the ultimate bunker busters of their day. But for all their might, these steel giants had significant weaknesses. Their greatest strength, their reliance on railways, was also their greatest vulnerability. They were slow-moving targets, confined to the rail network. If a bridge was destroyed or a section of track was sabotaged, the gun was trapped. This made them prime targets for enemy saboteurs and increasingly for aircraft. As air power grew, a lone bomber could spot the telltale sign of a railway spur and neutralize a weapon that had cost millions and taken years to build. The crews became experts in camouflage. They would hide the guns in forests or tunnels, covering them with enormous camouflage nets to blend in with the. They developed shoot and scoot tactics, firing a few rounds and then immediately moving the gun to a new prepared position before the enemy could zero in on their location with counter-battery, fire, or an airstrike. It was a constant cat-and-mouse game, with the crews fighting not just the enemy, but the very nature of their own weapon. Life for the men who served these guns was anything but glamorous. It was a world of grease, steel, and constant, grueling labor. The work was physically demanding and incredibly dangerous. Handling the massive shells and propellant charges required immense strength and focus. as a single mistake could lead to a catastrophic accident. The noise from firing was literally deafening, and crews had to endure the constant vibrations and concussive blasts. Maintenance was a never-ending task. The immense forces of firing meant that every part of the gun and its carriage was under extreme stress. The barrel had to be cleaned, the recoil mechanisms checked, and the intricate aiming gear calibrated. It was a 24/7 job, performed in all weather conditions, often under the threat of enemy attack. These crews formed a tight-knit community, bound by the shared experience of taming these mechanical monsters. From the Western Front in World War I to the siege of Sevastopol in World War II, railway guns were deployed in nearly every major conflict of the first half of the 20th century. The Germans, with their famous Paris gun and the monstrous Schwerer, Gustav used them to shell Paris from over 75 miles away and to crack the supposedly impregnable Soviet fortresses in Crimea. The French and the British also developed their own powerful railway artillery, using them to hammer German positions and industrial centers. The Americans brought their own versions to Europe, capable of long-range bombardment against key strategic targets. They were instruments of siege warfare and strategic bombardment, capable of reaching targets far behind the front lines that were immune to conventional artillery. Each firing was a major event, a blow struck not just at a physical target, but at the enemy's morale. However, the reign of the railway gun was destined to be short-lived. By the mid-1940s, the very technologies that once made them vulnerable sealed their fate. The development of long-range heavy bombers like the B-17 and the Lancaster meant that air power could now deliver even larger payloads with greater accuracy and flexibility without being tied to a rail line. At the same time, artillery technology was advancing. Lighter, more mobile heavy guns, and crucially, the first operational ballistic missiles, like the German V2, offered new ways to strike deep into enemy territory. The railway gun, once the king of the battlefield, had become a slow, vulnerable, and logistically nightmarish relic. They were simply too big, too slow, and too demanding for the new pace of modern combined arms warfare. Today, the last of these steel giants rests silently in museums, their barrels pointed peacefully at the sky. They are humbling reminders of a different era of warfare, an era defined by industrial scale and brute force. The legacy of the railway gun is a fascinating story of human ambition, incredible engineering, innovation, and the ultimate belief that sheer size and power could conquer all. They stand as monuments to a time when nations poured their resources into creating the biggest, most powerful weapons imaginable. Titans of steel that briefly ruled the world's battlefields before being surpassed by the relentless march of technology. Thanks for watching this deep dive into one of history's most impressive weapons. If you enjoyed this journey into the age of steel and steam, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the annals of military history. See you next time.